This is Glacier Green. It's Monday, and we're mixing it up again. Are you ready for this little gem? So today I thought we would look at a color. These have been very popular in recent years. These are super granulating colors by Schmincke. Today, I'm looking at Glacier Green. The pigments that make up Glacier Green, I love, first off. And I have these pigments in Daniel Smith. And you see, that is the mix. This is the pan from Schmincke. Let me just show you this color. It's absolutely beautiful. This is Glacier Green. And that was just applying the color to a nice wet wash. But let's take a look at what starts to happen. Now, these super granulating colors, one of the things they are known for is how the pigments separate. And there's the premix color. We're going to mix this one today, and I think we can come pretty close. Let me just say that it is very important to understand when you want to mix a color that you can purchase as a convenience color. And if this is one that you love, I'm going to have everything linked in the description below. But the sticker shock might get you on a 15 ml tube of this paint from Blick, which again, I'll have it linked below. The color's amazing, but for the same price, I could get both pigments that I have in Daniel Smith and come pretty close, but increase my mixing capabilities. So again, why do we buy convenience colors? So that we have the convenience of not having to mix them. If this was a color that you thought you would use a lot, then I would say grab the convenience. But if it's a color that you'd like to play around and experiment with before you buy it, I'm going to show you how to mix it. So just stick with me. To start with, let's look at how they are separating. Is that gorgeous? These are so pretty. Like, there's so many different ways we could use this. And again, this is Glacier Green by Schmincke. And I'm going to just kind of set this. You see, I had already swatched it. I swatched it once earlier. It's not completely dry yet, but look at that. And it can be different each time. You see, it just gives so much texture. And of course, so there's the one we just did. I love the granulation. I love to paint seascape and landscape, and I just think that, I'll just leave that one there. Granulation just helps me. My painting sort of starts to come to life, it paints itself. Even in the pan, when this is wet, like when it dries, it looks like a solid color. But while it's wet, I can even see some separation happening in the pan. So let's talk about what makes up this color. Today we're going to be mixing PG50 and PR233. Now it's important to know your pigments when you want to mix the colors, but it's also important if you're trying to duplicate any manufacturer's convenience mix. Your chances of correctly duplicating that are going to increase, of course, when you use their versions of the pigments. Now, I'm not going to be using Schmincke versions of these single pigments that make up this color. I'm going to be using my Daniel Smith palette that you see here. But I still think we can come pretty close. One of the things that's important is you have to make sure that your version of those two pigments is a very similar looking hue to the one that's being used by the original manufacturer that's creating the convenience mix in the first place. Now here with Daniel Smith, I have PG50, and I'm going to swatch the PG50 out for you. And this can vary with pigments quite a bit. For example, like if we look at a pigment red 101, there are so many. That pigment, the hues that you can get can look so different from like a very cool purplish tone to quite, you know, a really warm. And this does not look like the color is showing up correctly. Teal or turquoise, or these are very hard colors to photograph. And this one is Cobalt Teal Blue, PG 150 by Daniel Smith. And you'll see here that I have this in stick form. This is a piece of a watercolor stick that I have just put into a half pan to include in my palette. I've done that quite a few times, and I've shared the video on how I selected these colors in my palette and how I did sticks. Like you see here, I have pieces of sticks here, 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 like quite a few that are in stick form. So if you're interested in something like that, you know, I'll try to pop a link up here so you can see the video on this palette. However, the PG 50 that I'm using is in the stick form by Daniel Smith. Now the PR 233, that is Potter's Pink. So Potter's Pink by Daniel Smith, that one, when you dry it in a half pan, it is very slow to reactivate. So you see, I have actually put water in mine here and kind of let that set for a bit so that when I wanted to swatch it out for you, it would be able to activate and move. So this is our PR 233, Potter's Pink. And Potter's Pink can vary very much so from brand to brand as well, as far as how that looks. Some looking more pink, some looking more brown. And this is a very granulating color. I'm just adding a little extra water to this wash here. I'll bring some more pigment in, just so that you'll be able to see this color like do its thing and show its granulation, because that is part of what makes this happen. That's part of what makes this possible. Potter's Pink is a beautiful color to include on your palette. And if you don't have it yet, I highly recommend. Again, I will link it below. I find that the Winsor & Newton professional version of this color, I have that as well. When you dry that into a half pan, it reactivates a little easier. And I do have that. So let me just show you the difference between the two. I will swatch the Winsor & Newton one right here below so that you can see how that hue varies from Daniel Smith to Winsor & Newton. But I can say that if you want to stick with the Daniel Smith version, just know that if you dry it into a half pan, you need to be patient with it, and you definitely need to prime it. You need to add some water and get that going before you're ready to paint. So here I have my Winsor & Newton professional colors, and my Potter's Pink is here. And I was using this just a little bit ago. So this has been wet. I'm not doing this from dry, so I don't want you to think that I just went out a dry pan and that's how quickly it activated. It takes a little bit, but not as much as the Daniel Smith does. So I'm not going to do as big of a swatch just because, you know, I want room for our mixed color down here. But just so that you can see, there we go, the difference between the two, Winsor & Newton and Daniel Smith. So as per usual, I'm going to take right here, and since we are mixing something that is a convenience color, I'm going to swatch the convenience color here for you. So you see when that's blended together, like as I do my mix, I'm going to be looking for that color when I have both of these mixed together. And like I did last time when we looked at Undersea Green, I'm going to show you like when it's a wetter wash, and then so that was wet into wet. And here I'm going to just put a little bit of it wet on dry, right? So that you can see if you don't want that separation, you know, you don't want to use a wet wash. And again, just coming back with just a clean brush with a little extra water so that I can really let these pigments kind of float around and do their thing. Let's go ahead and mix this one. So to start with, I'm going to be grabbing my PG50, again, from Daniel Smith. And let's just get that right over here on the palette. Right, so I have a nice puddle of that there. There we go. And we need our pigment red 233. Potter's pink. Right there. Okay, let's get these mixed together. If I add more Potter's pink than the PG50, which is what I have here, I have almost a purplish color. Let me just show that to you because this is a beautiful mix on its own and it's going to look quite different. Once again, just coming back with a little extra water so the pigments can like move and do their own thing here. Drop a little bit more of that in. And then we're going to adjust our mix to get our Glacier Green. So I'm going to set that right there. And you guys can watch that kind of develop. I think it's really interesting to watch them morph and change in real time. Now I'm just going to leave that there where you can see it. And now let's go back to, once again, our PG50, which was the Cobalt Teal Blue in Daniel Smith. That's what they've named this color. And our Potter's Pink PR233. Okay, so there's less this time as they mix this together. Now I'm looking for something that's going to be very similar to what I'm seeing in my Schmincke pan of paint here. Coming back in more of the PG50. Touch more of the Potter's Pink. And I'm just slowly adding just a touch of Potter's Pink until I'm going to see that. It almost looks blue to me in person, but there's definitely, now I went just a little too far, a little bit more of this. There we go. So again, it's kind of, it's just, if you don't have the color, of course that can make it more difficult because you just don't have a reference for what, how to mix it. But here I'm going to do the wet on dry. Okay, and now we're going to get this, and I'm definitely going to come back with water so that this can move and flow and do its own thing. And absolutely just getting some of the excess water out of my brush so that I can pick up this pigment we just mixed and drop it in here to this wet wash. And again, when I first put it down, I have a very uniform color that looks like the color I had mixed on my palette. But the more this sets, we're going to start to see this start happening. So I'm going to kind of give that a moment. But let's look at this one where we went with more Potter's Pink than the Cobalt Teal Blue. And we're getting the hint of the teal kind of settling in underneath. And that Potter's Pink and its granulation is just kind of rising to the surface and stealing the show. With Schmincke, there's more PG50 than PR233. And definitely our teal blue color is leading the way. Now, this is a cobalt. The PG50 is a cobalt color. So it's going to granulate on its own, which is what makes up these super granulating colors. It's two colors that granulate that they've mixed together. And already we're starting to have something happening here. So I'm going to just kind of leave this in real time. We'll have to wait and see. I think mine might be slightly darker when we do the wet on dry, but it's not dry yet. So we do have to wait and see. I'm just going to hold off while this does its thing, kind of let you watch for a minute, and we'll see what happens. just going to mix up some more. I'm just going to do another swatch here so I can do a bigger swatch of both, where they'll be side by side. So again, PG50. This will just show you once more, you know, how much of each I'm kind of mixing in to get my version of the color. And then my PR233. All right, let's mix those together. Yeah, I need just a little bit more of the PR233, so just a touch, okay, and just bringing that in. There we go. Grab some water. That brush, so I'm just picking up my pigment that I've mixed. I'm not diluting this anymore. I've got plenty of water on the surface of this paper here. There we go. Just gonna let it do its thing. Do you like granulating colors? Were you a fan of the Schmincke Super Granulating colors when they came out? I know I immediately fell in love. Now, this is Schmincke, and this is my mix with Daniel Smith. This is more PG50 versus PR233, and then this is more of the PR233 versus the PG50. That is another thing I like when it comes to being able to mix these things yourself, is that you have the freedom to change that up. If you like this look, but you want it to just shift slightly one way or the other, you have the freedom of doing that. Not only that, by having these colors on your palette, these single pigments on your palette, you have the freedom to mix so many other colors with them. Potter's Pink is one that I absolutely recommend grabbing because you can get some amazing mixes with Potter's Pink. And not just with other granulating colors. If you mix this with colors that are not granulating, you're going to get some really interesting results as well. And if you're interested in that, I can certainly do more mixes with Potter's Pink. It's definitely a favorite. So let me know, drop me a comment. And if you've been enjoying these mixes on Mondays, please give the video a thumbs up. Hit that like button. It definitely helps. And I appreciate it. So our Potter's Pink is still drying, but if you look, the Daniel Smith version is slightly more, I would say muted, leaning a little bit more like that pink brownish tone, versus the Winsor & Newton here is looking a little bit more pink, definitely leaning more into that red. They're both beautiful. This is not done drying yet, so you're not seeing the full effects of the granulation from the Daniel Smith, but they are very close. Let me just grab a quick, I don't have the PG50 in the Winsor & Newton Professional, so I can't grab that, but I will grab the PG50 from Daniel Smith and the Potter's Pink from Winsor & Newton, and I'll mix up a version with that just so that you can kind of see it. I can put it right here on the card. So this will be Daniel Smith PG50 and Winsor & Newton PR233. So once again, I'm going to kind of be looking back at my original pan as I do this. I'm going to grab that PG50. Okay. And then from my Winsor & Newton, grab some of the Potter's Pink, the PR233, and let's get them mixed together. Right, I think that's leaning a little bit more towards the purple like this one did. So I'm just going to grab a tiny bit more, get that on my brush, tiny bit more of the PG50. And of course, by tiny bit, you see that was like way more than a tiny bit. Does it happen to you? That happens to me all the time when I'm mixing colors. That's okay. It's going to give us plenty of this, plenty of our color. All right, so looking back at that, I think I have something that's pretty similar. Let's go ahead and swatch this one out. So once again, I'm just going to wet my paper first. And Daniel Smith is definitely a brand that I love for the ability for of their watercolors to, colors that granulate. How they granulate, look, you can already see it separating on my palette. So I'm just going to mix those back together. Drop that right in there. Okay, and I'm going to let that do its thing. You see how very similar all three of these are. So if you have Winsor & Newton Potter's Pink and the Daniel Smith PG50, or if you have a Winsor & Newton PG50, one thing you need to look at with the PG50 is that they are similar. Now, ways you can do this without actually having to purchase it across brands is go to someplace like Blick online, where they show you kind of a swatch of the color. Go to that brand, look at the swatch, open another window, open up the swatch of, say, Daniel Smith's version, Schmincke's version, or Winsor & Newton version, whatever brand you have. Open up, if you can find Schmincke's version in that single pigment, and then the version of the brand that you have. Compare those two, how they look side by side. Now, of course, there's going to be some minor discrepancies because you're looking at a photo representation of it and not seeing it in person. But that's going to give you a really good idea if those hues, those versions of those two pigments even look close. Because there are some that just aren't even going to look close. And again, a perfect example is if you look up PR101 pigments across brands and by different color names, you're going to see so many different versions of that particular pigment that you really need to narrow down before you can do something like this, what version they might be using. So these are just going to continue to dry. Oh, and I will put another one right here. So this is going to be, and that's actually pretty wet. Okay, so here, as we do the attempt to do the wet on dry paper, to see if we can come close to the original. And I think that actually looks pretty darn close. I'm going to re-swatch my Daniel Smith mix that was up here. Again, just kind of drying my brush off so I don't have too much water, because I do want to do wet on dry, a wet on dry version. And I don't have much of this mix left, so it's probably not going to be a good, that's going to be too light. That is a little dark. It's whatever. It's fine. But my point is that I was making is if you don't want these colors to separate, and I do think that this shows very well, you don't get as much separation when you paint wet on dry as you do when you get into the wet and wet. And this is looking much more separating. This isn't. The first ones I did when I was testing this, and I'll show them to you. Okay, ignore the ultramarine. That's for a different project. So here is the Schmincke Glacier Green. These are now pretty much dry. When I started mixing, again, experimenting, how much of each do I need to bring into the mix? At first, I wasn't bringing in enough of my PR233, my Potter's Pink. I kept changing it up, changed it up again. And then the third time I brought in a lot more, and that gave me this. And here you go. So here's Schmincke's Glacier Green. And here's my mix of Daniel Smith with the PG50 and the PR233. They look pretty close. They're definitely pretty close. I see just a little bit of subtle differences in the PG50, but again, like I said, if I was using Schmincke's version of PG50 that matched this hue, I could probably mix it exact. But you know, in this case, as far as I'm concerned, close is good enough. So you let me know what you think. These are still drying. But I think as far as like what the granulation and the separation that they're going to do, I think that might be pretty much set. But take a look there. So we have Schmincke, my mix with Daniel Smith, and then my mix with the Daniel Smith and Winsor Newton. This, I probably could have got a more granulating closer to this and like what you're seeing here. That's probably has to do with the wetness of the wash that I put down. These things can also impact how it granulates and how it separates. So it's very important to kind of play with these. But there you go. What did you think? Is it close enough for you? Is this a mix that you think you're going to give a try? Let me know. Drop me a comment. And are these some of your favorite colors? If there's a color you'd like to see how to mix, please leave me a comment. I definitely read all of your comments, and maybe you'll see your request on a future Monday mix. Until next time, my friends, keep creating. I'm going to pop another video up right here that you might like to watch next, and I will see you all in a video real soon. Bye.